Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket numbers 2021-143E and 2021-144E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners C. Williams, Belzer, Powers, Caston and J. Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Irvin and Thomas. Before we broke for lunch recess, I believe we were finishing up commissioner questions. Are there any more commissioner questions for this panel? All right.
Mr. Chairman, there was some limited new testimony brought out through commissioner questions, and with your permission, I'd like to ask just a few questions on redirect.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Duff, one thing that Commissioner Caston asked about were different phrases from the EEDSM statute, South Carolina Code annotated 583720. One of those phrases related to a quote, reduce consumption or demand. Can you explain for the commission the difference, if there is one, in your opinion, between the word consumption and the word demand?
Yes. Consumption is the total amount of energy that's being utilized. Demand is when that energy is being utilized.
I'm sorry, say that last one again.
It's when the energy is being utilized. So peak demand is what we're trying to utilize our programs to reduce. And peak demand occurs at times when there is high energy prices, so it's generally periods of high demand or system type emergencies.
Thank you. And from your perspective, this consumption or demand, is that from the utility's perspective? Is it from the customer's perspective? Is it from some other perspective?
It's the consumption is being reduced from the utility grid and from the customer. The demand is being reduced from both because again, a customer is going to have their own unique load shape that's going to have their peak demands, and the utility system has its own demand. So to the extent that those line up, but with respect to what our programs aim to reduce, it's the customer's demand that aligns with utility grid demand.
Thank you. And another phrase that was asked about was energy supply and in-use technologies. As a fact witness, an EEDSM expert, can you explain or tell us whether you believe rooftop solar to be a quote energy supply or in-use technology?
In this context, I believe it would be a end-use technology that's being adopted by the customer. But I do believe there's a context where it could also be in an electric grid, a supplier if it's an exporter.
The EM&V also came up in commissioner questions. Could either of you, maybe Mr. Duff, explain exactly what EM&V is and how it works in an EEDSM context?
Sure. EM&V is evaluation, measurement, and verification. And the company puts out an IRP for an independent third party to use industry best practices to measure and evaluate the impact of the program. So it will measure gross savings, and then it will do a process evaluation, which is used to determine net to gross, as well as other areas for improvement. And when I say net to gross, net savings are savings that are associated with free riders, market effects, spillover, that would alter what the utility can claim credit for through the program.
And so when you say claim credit for, how is that EM&V data used as related to cost recovery?
So for example, if the customer, we gave 10 customers an incentive to get an LED bulb. We'll keep it really simple. And they installed that LED bulb. We would go out and we would measure what the savings were that were achieved through those 10 customers, and you kind of come up with, well, we probably wouldn't do all 10. We would do a statistically significant sample, so say 8, and you determine what the gross savings were, or the energy consumption reduction that occurred. And then we would, if they had a statistically significant sample, they would do different approaches, generally surveys, to ask the customer whether or not it was the utility incentive that got them to produce the bulb. So if in fact one of the 10 surveyed said that I was going to do it regardless, then that would be considered a free rider. The program incentive was not what drove the customer. So in that instance, the gross savings, or let's say 10 kilowatt hours per bulb that was installed, would be reduced by 10%, or 1/10 of the customers who did it without the incentive.
One of the things you said, I think, is that you issue an IRP for the third party.
RFP, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. This is my last issue, Mr. Chairman. We'll buzz through this. One of the issues discussed was demand management and behind-the-meter changes to customer equipment. Are you familiar with the Power Share program?
Yes.
Would you mind explaining that program to the Commission?
It is a non-residential demand response, or DSM program, in which the company enters into a contractual agreement with a customer to reduce their load or shed load at times when the company would call on them. And it's limited in the number of times and duration. And if the customer signs the contract, they get an incentive for giving the utility to call them and tell them to reduce their demand or energy consumption at a specific period of time. And they, in turn, if they do not reduce their demand that they contracted to, they would actually have to pay a penalty to the utility. So it's a contractual demand response program.
Thank you, Mr. Duff. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my redirect. I'm not sure whether there's cross on my redirect, but to the extent there isn't, I would ask that these witnesses be excused.
Chairman.
Let me get to Attorney Knowles, Commissioner Caston, and then you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ORS would have some recross related to commissioner questions.
Your microphone.
Mr. Chairman, ORS would have some recross in response to commissioner questions.
Roger that.
And respectfully, Mr. Chairman, and my understanding is that recross must be limited to the topics discussed on redirect.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I'll be very brief then. All right, Mr. Duff, hello. You talked with Mr. Wellborn about the EM&V process and some of the inputs that you consider. Free ridership is one of the key inputs in some of the cost effectiveness test results that you've been discussing today with the commission. Isn't that right?
The net to gross ratio that's applied to gross energy savings is the key. Free ridership is one of the variables that impacts that, correct?
Okay. And you do understand there's a significant disconnect between you and Mr. Ori on the issue of free ridership.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Caston?
Just can't get rid of me, can you? Thinking in terms of, I think, the question that was asked relative to consumption, you know, the difference between consumption, demand, and I was also thinking about rain barrels. And how all of this coalesces, you know, like, you know, what's everyone's understanding? And I'm kind of, I think, maybe better understanding how maybe I think you're understanding, or I think you're understanding, and that kind of thing, which is good. But relative to all that, and thinking about the rain barrel, as a matter of fact, made me think about this relative to consumption and demand. In EE, DSM, what's your definition of EE, which you kind of said, and demand side management, which of course, you would agree that energy efficiency and demand side management are two different things, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And from an energy efficiency point of view, would you agree that energy efficiency is doing the same thing you are doing, but using less of it?
That is a common definition. I think I would add a little bit to it and clarify it if that's okay.
Sure, sure.
So I think you could also have a case where you're doing more with the same. So you're not necessarily reducing consumption, you're increasing comfort. So not the same level of comfort. And it's the example of turning up your air conditioner because it's more efficient. So you're more comfortable and you use the same energy that you used under the old inefficient one. I think that's still efficiency because you're getting more for the same rather than the same for less. That being said, I think if you think about an entire home as a system operating together that all impacts your energy consumption, that the investment in rooftop solar does exactly that. It keeps the home machine, if you will, operating while consuming less energy or electricity from the grid.
Well, that may be debatable, but I guess that's why we're all here, because we're kind of debating whether that is the case or not.
Yeah, I think you could think about it like almost like insulation. Insulation itself doesn't use energy. It allows you to keep your home and have the devices in it potentially use less energy. And it's no different to install PV on a rooftop. Then it allows that home to continue to operate in the same level while using less energy, consuming less energy from the electric grid.
I understand your argument. Just trying to keep all things equal here. Not like if I have an energy efficient HVAC unit, I can run it down cooler and then still have the same bill. Not that. I'm just talking about everything is neutral. In other words, I'm going to keep it on the same temperature as though I did before. Bill would be higher, bill would be lower if it was more energy efficient. All things equal, trying to keep it simple. And again, along the rain barrel, let's say it wasn't a rain barrel, let's say I put a well in too. You know, I'm still tied into the city water, but I put a well in. Because, you know, I figured out that when I irrigate my yard from the water company, they actually charge me sewer for that too. And man, that was expensive. So put in a separate system. So I will be using less water from the city, correct?
I believe so.
If I don't irrigate from them. Instead of a rain barrel, I'm using a well. I'm using less water from the city. But I'm still irrigating from my well. Am I using less water?
I don't know. I'm not a water expert.
What?
But I think I understand your premise, and I would say that you're using the same amount of water. But it's just like in my explanation, it's electricity from the grid. That's what we're talking about with the utility efficiency program, is the electricity from the grid. And so that's why we incentivize customers to take action that will reduce consumption from the grid?
I think every utility, electric, water, sewer, everyone should try to do things to flatten the curve, reduce peaks, and try to hold that demand down. No two ways about it. To me, there's no argument there relative to anything. The debate, or I guess the discussion, comes down to, is it energy efficient? Is it just demand side? Because demand side's a totally different thing than energy efficiency. You know, we're talking about trying to flatten peaks. Or are we simply just shifting load? Like rain barrel well, not using it here, but I'm still using it. Rooftop solar, I'm not using it in the grid, but I'm still using it. So I guess what I'm still trying to get my head around, and I understand what you're saying, and I'm not going to, I won't beat this dead horse anymore. I'll wait until round 2 and see what else we learn here. But I really want folks to think about this energy efficiency thing and help me see it better, differently. Tell me I'm wrong or something, because to me it's still more of a, I'm doing the same thing, I'm just using less water, or I'm using less electricity. To me, that's energy efficiency. Demand side means I'm kind of controlling the demand, trying to flatten my peaks and all, but that's what that's doing. Alternate generation or alternate water supply is an alternate generation, alternate water supply. I'm using the same amount, I'm just using a different source.
So I think I understand your point, but I think of things like using windows that to open up. We have an energy efficiency program where we talk about having customers make sure their windows are open on hot days to let the light from the sun warm the home. So in my mind, that's the exact same thing. It's a type of energy, it's thermal energy coming from the sun that's heating your home by keeping your windows open on a cold day. And the same could be said on shutting it during a sunny, hot day will help keep your home cooler, because basically the heat that would have come in is not going to come in. So I still believe that it meets that statutory definition of efficiency and conservation that was laid out.
I believe you believe that. And as far as thermal pane windows and conservation, I get that too. But the fact that I'm still kind of struggling with this, and apparently others are too, and the fact that, to your knowledge and to mine, no other state has done this or considered rooftop solar or solar panels EE. You know, I think it's worth, let's think long and hard about this. Make sense?
Understood.
Okay. I have no more questions. Thank you. I hope I don't.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to the extent we're done with these witnesses, I would ask that they be excused. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Duff, Ms. Powers, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I have more colleagues with questions. Commissioner Powers.
I just want to ask a quick question. I guess kind of what Commissioner Caskin asked about other programs, other states. Does Duke have, or has Duke tried to implement this proposed program in other areas where you do business?
We have not to date. We are in the process of evaluating and developing it for other jurisdictions. But I would say that there are state rules and requirements that are different, which can create different economics. And I think that that's one of the reasons why, when we look, this was the right time. The economics around solar have changed. The cost of installation has come down. It's becoming a more widely accepted technology. South Carolina has quite a bit of sun. So again, those things on what makes a good efficiency program, they're present here. And I think it's a little bit scary to assume that just because we're the first, that there's something wrong with that. I think it works within the South Carolina context. And I think it's actually something that we as a utility are proud of proposing, because we've worked with a lot of concerned stakeholders and gotten support and input along the way to design this in a way that works in South Carolina.
So, I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Us being first, is that good or is that bad?
Because I think it's a good thing, because there are the checks in place that were brought up earlier regarding the fact that we'll be sharing the ongoing results with stakeholders. We'll be having a third party, not Duke, doing the measurement and verification of what's going on. And all of those EM&Vs are reviewed by an ORS expert to make sure that they find no issues with how things were measured and verified. And those results are ultimately used to determine whether the program should go forward, as well as what is ultimately recovered from customers.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a good answer.
Yes, sir. Any more questions for the witnesses? Hearing none. Sir, ma'am, you are excused. You may step down and you are excused. Thank you for your testimony. All right. Are we ready for the next witness? Attorney Mixon or Clancy? Excuse me.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. CCL Space, Upstate Forever, NCIA, and Vote Solar would like to now call Eddie Moore to the stand.
Mr. Moore, if you would take the stand and pause to be sworn in by the court reporter.
Certainly. If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, please state your name for the record.
Eddie Moore.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Coastal Conservation League. I'm the senior director of our energy program.
And how long have you worked in the field of clean energy policy and utility regulation?
Pretty much back to about 2001, 2002, so almost 20 years.
Okay, and do you have any specific experience relating to energy efficiency policy, specifically program cost effectiveness, incentive structures, and the evaluation, measurement, and verification, or EM&V process?
Yes. I was hired at the Arkansas Public Service Commission as an advisor to the commission on these issues. Over a period of 6 years, we developed a regulatory framework addressing many of these issues. And in doing so, we had a lot of technical assistance from many of the leading thinkers in the field whom I was privileged to work with as we addressed EM&V, net to gross ratios. I can remember an early meeting where the whole staff of the commission and the public staff, what we would call the ORS here, everybody sitting in a room being tutored on net to gross. So, we kind of slogged through those issues over a significant period of time and made a bunch of determinations that I feel like to this day have put the state in a good place.
Thank you. And with respect to South Carolina energy policy, has your experience given you specific insight into the development and passage of the Energy Freedom Act?
Yes. Like many parties that have appeared, or I don't know about many, a handful of parties that have appeared before this commission, I had involvement in the negotiation of the terms of that legislation, and also, as I look at the statutory framework for demand-side activities in South Carolina, it's very similar to what I've experienced in Arkansas and seen in other states as well.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, based on Mr. Moore's extensive experience and qualifications, we would request that he be qualified as an expert witness in the field of clean energy policy and utility regulation, energy efficiency policy, and South Carolina energy policy.
All right. Who's presenting? Attorney Bateman, this is your witness?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is Andrew Bateman with ORS. We would object to the extent they seek to qualify Mr. Moore as an expert to discuss the intent of the EFA and the legislation surrounding it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
Give me 1 second. I just want to understand the basis of the objection. Could you please go further?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I don't believe it's proper testimony for any party to testify to the intent of legislation. In addition, I don't believe Mr. Moore has sufficiently demonstrated qualifications to do so, even if that were appropriate.
All right. Ms. Clancy?
Yes, Mr. Moore has legal training and experience as a practicing lawyer in the field of energy policy and utility regulation. Under South Carolina law, experts such as Mr. Moore with legal training and experience have been permitted to be qualified as experts in the legal field in which they have that expertise, even if they're not licensed attorneys in the state they are testifying. And I would refer the commission to State v. Morris. And the citation for that is 376 SC and at page 204. And I would also like to add that to the extent ORS is objecting to the persuasiveness of Mr. Moore's testimony as to the legislative history and relevant intent, or to the quality of his testimony in general, that objection would go to the weight the commission decides to afford Mr. Moore's testimony and not the admissibility.
Mr. Chairman.
Attorney Bateman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, and Ms. Clancy, I apologize if I misunderstood. It sounded to me like you were actually talking about two separate issues. One issue is Mr. Moore's ability to testify to the legislative intent behind the EFA, which we would certainly object to. The second issue that I think you may have been talking about is Mr. Moore's ability to testify to legal issues generally, which, as we discussed at the outset of this hearing, we would object, though we would object to those contemporaneous with the states and CCL's attempt to put those issues into the record. And as a result, I'm not actually objecting to his ability to address the legal issues generally now. Right now, I am objecting to Mr. Moore's ability to be qualified as an expert to testify to the legislative intent of the EFA.
I'm inclined to sustain the objection unless you have a citation, something to support the witness testifying as an expert to the legislative intent of the Energy Freedom Act. Is there any basis for your witness to do that? Ms. Clancy.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, very quickly, this is Kate Mixon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Is this Ms. Clancy's witness or is this Ms. Mixon's witness?
I thought it was Ms. Clancy's witness.
Then I would ask that Ms. Clancy be the counsel to answer.
That's usually the way it works. In trial court, let me say that. That's usually the way it works in trial court. Maybe it works differently here. But I think it's fair for Ms. Clancy to respond.
Add that I believe we cited this. The case is Vortex. I don't have the exact citation on hand in our response to ORS's motion to strike, but South Carolina law has permitted experts to testify to the ultimate issue. in this case, and I would argue here that offering an opinion as to the underlying intent of the EFA and the overarching policy goals would go to the underlying issues in this proceeding. And so many of the issues in this case are so tied up into interpreting what is still a relatively new legal framework. And I think we've seen through all of the pre-filed testimony that's been submitted that it's impossible to ignore commenting on the goals and the ultimate intent of the EFA.
Understood. Well, I found that the text of the statute is the best evidence as to legislative intent. As such, I sustain your objection to the witness being qualified as an expert to testify to legislative intent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, with the exception of legislative intent, could you restate the areas in which you wish the witness to be qualified as an expert?
Yes, actually, legislative intent wasn't one of those areas. It was an expert witness in the field of clean energy policy and utility regulation, energy efficiency policy, and South Carolina energy policy.
Okay. Seeing no objection, I will qualify the expert in those areas.
Great, thank you.
So obviously, Ms. Clancy, if your witness starts to give an opinion on legislative intent, there's going to be an objection to that.
Understood. Absolutely.
All right.
Leave that to counsel. Mr. Moore, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on September 21st, 2021, direct testimony consisting of 9 pages?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony at this time?
No.
Mr. Moore, if the questions put to you in your testimony were asked at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move to have Mr. Moore's pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Moore's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Excuse me.
And Mr. Moore, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony today?
Yes.
Would you please read your summary to the commission?
Sure. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name's Eddie Moore. I'm testifying on behalf of the Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Upstate Forever, North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, and Vote Solar. Purpose of my direct testimony is to support commission approval of the Smart Saver solar program that Duke Energy is proposing in this docket. For decades, customer-based energy efficiency and customer-based renewable electricity generation have been treated differently by utilities and by regulators. But these resources provide similar benefits to the utility system that can be enhanced if they're integrated. Laudably, through this proposal, Duke Energy has built upon the energy efficiency policies that the Commission already has in place to promote EE, customer-based renewable energy and demand response, in a coordinated fashion. In particular, there are 2 aspects of the program I'd like to highlight and that I believe will benefit all ratepayers. First, the Smart Saver program will reduce system costs by incentivizing the reduction of utility load caused by the portion of customer-produced solar energy that's consumed behind the meter. This portion of customer solar production will reduce the primary energy, such as coal and natural gas, consumed by power plants to meet the needs of all ratepayers. Also, because this program is available only to all electric residential customers, it effectively tackles the 2 most expensive seasonal peaks in the utility system. All electric residential customers' air conditioning demand adds to the summer peaks, which are more frequent and last longer, and their water and heating demand drives winter peaks, which have become the focus of Duke Energy's utility resource plan. While the solar production will reduce the summer peaks, Duke's requirement that the customers participating in the program must sign up for the Bring Your Own Thermostat demand response program for the next 25 years will reduce the winter peaks. To ensure that this program achieves projected load reductions, this program, like all programs approved under the EE statute, must undergo independent evaluation, measurement, and verification, or EM&V. This process provides a periodic, statistically rigorous evaluation of the actual results of the program so that it can be verified and, if necessary, modified and improved. Second, the proposed solar incentive is needed to realize the benefits I described above. It'll help customers overcome barriers to adoption of the new dynamic TOU rates that the Commission adopted for solar choice net metering customers, combined with a long-term commitment to winter peak reduction. In particular, the two TOU rates plus the Smart Saver program encourage the most critical subset of potential solar customers to modify their energy consumption through an effective combination of carrots and sticks. For example, under the TOU rate, higher rates and higher critical peak prices during peak periods are a stick. It encourages the solar customer to avoid adding to the winter or summer peak. The lower rates provided at non-peak times are a carrot. It rewards the customer for shifting load to off-peak times when it costs less to serve all customers' energy needs. The Smart Saver program itself also includes carrots and sticks. The upfront rebate is a carrot, but the $200 penalty for failing to respond to the winter peak is a stick. Thus, the Smart Saver program, the incentives, both negative and positive, complement and reinforce those carrots and sticks that are in the TOU rate. So more generally, that's an innovative rate design, and it shows how pairing rate design with incentives can amplify the benefits of existing rates and technologies. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony, and I would ask, I guess, council or the commission if it's proper to go to my rebuttal testimony, or if that's at a later time.
Yes, that will be later in the proceeding. At this point in time, Mr. Moore is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission on his direct testimony.
The companies don't have any cross for Mr. Moore at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ORS is no cross for Mr. Moore's direct testimony.
Thank you, sir. All right, commissioners.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Urban.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moore, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. How about yourself?
All right. You've been qualified as an expert in energy policy, so let me ask you this question. Would you agree that there's no real silver bullet?
Commissioner Urban, sir?
Yes, sir.
For some reason or another, you're not appearing on the screen.
How's that?
I don't know if you, there you go.
I apologize.
No worries. Please proceed, sir. Sorry for the interruption.
And I'll repeat the question, Mr. Moore. When we're trying to reduce winter peak, or for that matter, summer peak, there's really no one thing standing alone that can do it. Would you agree with that? It takes a combination of strategies.
Is greater than the sum of the parts.
Okay.
Mr. Moore, if you could increase the volume of your microphone, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Is that better?
Let me cut to the chase and ask it another way. If a investor-owned utility improves residential energy efficiency and demand-side management, is that cheaper than building new gas peaker plants?
If it's done through the proper framework with the proper evaluation up front. In other words, just saying the words energy efficiency or demand response or demand reduction, that doesn't get you over the hump. But if you've done the right analysis up front and you're taking a targeted action that is additional to the market, it's additional to what would happen absent the program, and that's a key point for EM&V, that what we're talking about here is not finding people who would do solar choice otherwise and giving them a rebate and a pat on the back. What we're talking about is adding customers to the market and shaping their choices and behavior in a way that's beneficial to the system. And that is cheaper than doing it through the supply side. And I think I remember Mr. Duff saying that on page 6 of his rebuttal. And it's a remarkable thing because he is not just the head of energy efficiency for Duke Carolinas or Duke Progress. He oversees programs in Ohio and in Florida, and it's a historically new thing to have high up officers within a major utility company telling us that this is pursuing a program like this with distributed solar as a way to lower system costs.
Thank you for that clarification and that answer. So let me back up just a minute and ask you, you're familiar with the proposed program from Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Pacific that's the subject of this docket, are you not?
Yes, sir.
Have you studied the details?
Yes, sir.
Do you have an expert opinion as to whether or not this proposed energy efficiency and demand side management program has been properly vetted in accordance with national standards that look at cost effectiveness and ability to save customers money on the long-term bills over a period of time? Have you done that evaluation?
Yes, I think that the program has been developed with the right initial look at the likely cost effectiveness. And, you know, one thing I would say about this that's different between demand side programs, which include energy efficiency programs, and supply side resources. Once you approve the power plant and the power plant's built, that's what you have, the power plant. You don't go back and do it a different way, even if it turns out to be the wrong bet. But with demand side programs, the evaluation doesn't stop with the application or with the approval. There's a look back and we true it up. And there are actions that we can take to help it or ensure that it meets its benefits. And if it's not beneficial, you cancel it, but you can't cancel the power plant once you build it. So I think it's particularly for the step of the process that we're in right now, they've laid the right groundwork and the proof will be in the pudding.
And just to follow up on that, then there's a mechanism for the Public Service Commission of South Carolina to evaluate this program once it's implemented and determine whether it should continue, correct?
Yes, and that the evidence that will be placed in the record on that issue is contestable. And so the commission will have the benefit not only of an expert look back and evaluation, but anybody's argument that it wasn't done right.
And that includes also regulatory staff. They'll have an opportunity at that time to bring their expert back and challenge the results of the various studies and methodologies, correct?
That's right, and that could include reducing the costs that are recovered based on non-performance.
In fact, the commission could deny inclusion in the rate base, I suppose, right? If they found it was
these are an expense that are a pass-through, so they don't go into rate base. But to be a little more specific, if the net to gross doesn't prove out, meaning that we spent money and we didn't get the benefits that were predicted, that will cause the net lost revenue number to go down proportionally, and the incentive to the utility, the performance incentive. And in fact, if it doesn't produce any benefits, the incentive will be zero and ratepayers will pay nothing for it. And so I want to be on the cautious side of this, though. once the program admin costs and the part of the expense that is an incentive to ratepayers is approved, those costs are going to be recovered. So it's only the performance-based part of the cost that will be reduced if we get non-performance. But on the other hand, there's an annual review. And once there's statistical evidence to adequately look at performance, you can stop the program. Like, you can't take back a power plant, but you can stop a program going forward that's not performing.
Or you can look for ways to tweak it and try to make it better performing for the following cycle or year. And then if it doesn't do better in year 2, then you can terminate it, correct?
Yes, and as a general matter, across time, markets for different types of equipment covered by energy efficiency programs do change, and you do constantly, it's prudent management of the program to constantly update it for changing conditions.
So we have, as a commission, an ongoing review role in this, in the event this program's adopted. This is not the last chance to evaluate its effectiveness, correct?
That's correct.
So why would it be cost effective from a standpoint of reducing peak demand? Explain that to us, because there have been some questions about it, and I'd like to hear your explanation.
Well, in my testimony, I used the words seasonal peaks. And that was deliberate. Some utility systems are very clearly winter peaking, and some are very clearly summer peaking. South Carolina's utilities right now have significant peaks in both seasons. And those peaks are driven primarily by weather-sensitive loads in the residential sector. And so this program is targeting both of those types of loads to get at the underlying driver of cost on the utility system. So obviously the solar production, it doesn't exactly match the summer peak, but it narrows the summer peak and it reduces the summer peak. The summer peak's much more frequent than the winter peak and more predictable. And the solar production tends to align. In other words, if you have a cloudy day in the summer, it's not as hot. If you have a sunny day in the summer, it's more hot. So there tends to be an alignment between the load reduction in the summer and particularly the solar measure. It's not as closely aligned as HVAC because that is the load. But then in the winter, it is likely that the peak is not hitting during the solar production, and that's why the sum is greater than the parts. We can enroll people who might go solar and make it a condition of them doing it to also enable control of their winter peak load. There will be verifiable savings there, and I'll believe that there are other savings that are not the submitted basis of approval of the program, but that are likely to either occur initially or that we can build on those later.
One of the criticisms that we've heard from ORS is the concern about the cost shift. Would you briefly address that particular issue for us? Is there a cost shift here to non-participating residential customers?
The fundamental cost shift issue was dealt with in the solar choice docket. In other words, it was a major purpose of this whole section of the solar choice statute to eliminate the cost shift to the greatest extent practicable. And the structure of the solar choice tariff does that. It leaves you with no cost shift or negligible cost shift without disrupting, i.e. killing the solar market. I think ORS might argue that energy efficiency programs themselves have a cost shift, and that some customers are paying for the cost of the program and others are not. So they might argue, I don't want to put words in their mouth, that there's a different issue here, but I think their argument is fundamentally the same solar cost shift that they saw before. But on the energy efficiency side of things, the over time, the UTC test shows that that the program will reduce utility system costs, and that's the bottom line. I think that this proceeding needs to focus on and find in the public interest. I think there was an implication in some of the testimony that the TRC test score showed that customers as a whole would pay more for this program than the benefits they would get. And I think you have to drill into that and understand what TRC is. And as applied in this case, I think what ORS's witness is actually saying is that the solar customers shouldn't be allowed to pay more, and it will actually create benefits for the other customers. So, I was a little concerned about that. So I think the basic cost shift was dealt with in the solar choice case, and that we actually are looking at a situation where non-participants are clear winners in this one.
And just to kind of finish up that point, they're clear winners because ultimately their rates will go down if this program is successful, correct?
Yes, and that's a very significant and interesting, it's not a simple statement. And Mr. Duff, I think, made the same point on page 12 of his rebuttal. And it was only maybe 10 or 12 years ago that really thorough analysis started to make the point that over time, the cost savings, utility cost savings for energy efficiency programs actually reduce rates, because reducing costs and reducing rates are not necessarily the same thing. So again, to me, that another really significant statement coming from Mr. Duff is that over time, by reducing these costs, we'll also reduce rates.
And it goes without saying that low-income customers or customers that are living below the poverty line, their rates will also be reduced proportionally, will they not?
Yes, I believe that's a very important point. Some people believe that the only way that you really help low-income customers is with efforts directed specifically at low-income customers, and I fully support those efforts. I think we should do more. However, at the end of the day, it's utility system costs that are what low-income customers pay. And if you reduce those, whether it's in a rate case through a disallowance or through implementation of energy efficiency program, when you reduce those system costs, you're reducing the rates that low-income customers are going to pay.
Because if you have to build a peaker plant, you've not only got the cost of construction, but you've got the cost of maintenance, you've got the cost of integration, and you've got the cost of transmission, correct?
You have those costs, and not only that, it's unlikely that the peaker plant is built in a rich neighborhood. So the low-income person is going to pay for the peaker plant and breathe the bad air.
And so it's really a win-win situation for all concerned in the sense that if we can lower rates over the long term for all ratepayers, whether they participate in this program or not, everyone benefits because we reduce the winter peak and the summer peak. We also reduce the needed future capacity that the utility has to go out and spend and build and maintain. And at the same time, we are giving people an opportunity to benefit from the program and its incentives. Would you agree with those statements?
I agree. That's the theory. I think it will be the fact. It's not my belief that we just say yes and then walk away and don't watch it closely. I think we have to watch implementation get the best leverage out of ratepayers' funds so that those things actually come true. But I think the company has laid a reasonable groundwork to show that that's a benefit we can get for our state.
What is your professional expert opinion about the correct methodology to evaluate the cost effectiveness? Did you mention the UTC? Is that the one that you support in this analysis?
Yes, and the utility cost test is the one that tells you if the money that the utility is putting in, which is the money ratepayers pay to the utility, is getting back more than you paid for. And I think, you know, one of the things that is, in a way, there's sort of a sideshow going on here about TRC and UTC that I think should be made explicit, which is in most states and for most of the time that energy efficiency programs have existed, TRC has been what's called the primary test, not for every state, but for most of them. And over the last 10 years or so, there's been a significant shift to UTC. And Mr. Duff gave one reason, which I feel like he wasn't trying to fully explain it, but I didn't think it did, which, you know, he said it's getting harder to get savings due to increased appliance efficiency, which is true. But that shift is not fundamentally occurring because we're trying to make energy efficiency programs look better. It's occurring because practitioners increasingly understood that while the TRC has a theoretical validity, it is almost impossible to get it implemented in a way that fairly evaluates the benefits that customers are paying for. And so and I was involved in conversations with a number of people around the country, you know, that gradually convinced people of this. And so South Carolina, when this commission adopted UTC as not as the exclusive test, but as the primary test, recently, it wasn't merely to produce some kind of better result in this case or some other case. It was part of a trend where people became dissatisfied for policy reasons with the TRC and came to the conclusion that UTC, which just for information is sometimes called PACT, Program Administrator Cost Test, because the utility is not always the program administrator. So PACT is a more general term. But I like UTC because it's more clear. And people have gravitated to UTC, and it's the right one to use here.
So as I understand your testimony, it's not just your expert opinion that makes UTC head and shoulders above the other tests. It's actually the adopted position of the South Carolina Public Service Commission by order. Is that right?
It is, and some of those reasons that cause people to move away from TRC and towards UTC are particularly applicable in the case of solar.
So we would have to violate our own prior decision if we went with some other test.
I think you would be zigzagging, and you know, what test are you going to use for the next program next year? You know, I think part of the benefit of having a framework is that it allows you to have a rational basis for deciding what do you approve and what do you not approve. And if you change the rules every time something comes up, you mess with your rational basis.
So it promotes consistency, transparency, and accountability. Would you agree?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Commissioner Powers.
Just a couple of questions. In your testimony, you talked about cost savings over time, and I think I'm still trying to find out how much time and how much savings. Is there any way to quantify that, or will that be the results of after the study or after a trial period is accomplished?
So Mr. Duff's direct testimony includes the results of his analysis. The UTC cost savings were slightly different for the Carolinas territory versus the Progress territory. If I remember, it's basically a 2-to-1 savings in Progress and a 2.5-to-1 in Carolinas. I don't remember the exact millions of dollars, but that's quantified. And while the time period for calculating those savings extends out 25 years because of the BYOT agreement, the way that those benefits are calculated, there's a significant discount rate. So what I'm saying is the value in the savings are heavily weighted to the early years. Even though there are savings in the out years, they don't count much. And so there's probably more that you would want to know about timing, but that's what I can say from memory.
Well, what I was talking about was savings to all customers, not just to solar customers. And you mentioned the benefits to low-income users. It sounded a lot like the old trickle-down economics to me. I'm not sure I really.
I personally don't like trickle-down economics, but I will say I was referring to the system benefits, not to the solar customer benefits. When I said 2-to-1 benefit, the ratio is actually better for customers as a whole than it is for participants. The participants, and this is part of this UTC versus TRC, that if you look strictly at the participant in the program, the person putting solar on their roof, they're kind of break even. But if you look at the benefits to the system, it's 2-to-1.
Okay. And it was, Mr. Duff seemed to think that South Carolina, because of the amount of sun we have, is a good place. Do you think that would also apply to their operations in Florida as well?
So the cost savings that we're talking about are savings on the utility system. So they're specific to the utility system. So just because there's more sun or less sun doesn't necessarily mean a particular utility will see the same benefit. So I can't really speak to that, although because Florida is even more strongly summer peaking than South Carolina. It's been South Carolina is becoming summer peaking. Florida's been summer peaking for a long time because the summer's so mild that a lot of people have electric heat. So I would expect you would have to have a strong effort on the winter peak reduction. But it could be that there are enough summer cost savings to make it work.
Well, for winter peaking utilities, does solar actually provide an increase in energy efficiency in any way?
I don't want to say it doesn't provide one in any way, but it's not much if the winter peak is before the sun comes up. But, I was, very interested to hear Commissioner Caston, talking about the smart thermostat and the 20-SEER air conditioner. A Nest thermostat is not just smart, it's learning. And so while Mr. Duff is counting the ability of the utility to interrupt on a winter morning, that thermostat also has the capability to actually reduce total energy usage by learning when you're there and when you're not. So that's what I was alluding to when I said there could be savings that are home energy reductions that are not solar and they're not the interruption at the winter peak. They're energy savings. So inducing people who are considering solar to also do the thermostat could lead to all of those things. And that's part of why I say it's the sum's greater than the parts.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moore.
Good afternoon.
A lot of things were covered there, and it's hard for me to write that fast. But the last part of the discussion I think you had with Commissioner Irvin, where you were talking about UCT, and I think I heard someone say about UCT was what this commission adopted, and it was the only thing we could use. I do not recall it that way at all, as I recall, and I can't recall which order, is that it distinctly left the option open to the commission to use multiple measures, including TRC and those other two acronyms that I cannot remember. But do you not recall that?
So I was not part of the discussion on the earlier adoption of I supported it, but I wasn't live for the discussion of changing from TRC to UTC. However, I completely support your point that you should look at all the tests, and the commission should not feel like it's put in a box in a number of ways in this proceeding. I think the commission should consider all the tests, all the statutes, all the evidence.
Well, I have a high level of confidence that's the way we left it, but if I'm wrong, I hope someone points that out. For that reason, because just saying the UCT is the godsend, by virtue of its name, do you want to, what does that acronym stand for?
It stands for Utility Cost Test, and I actually put a footnote, I think it was in my surrebuttal testimony, with a link to the document that spells out these tests. These tests, you'll be happy to know, came from California, and it's called the California Standard Practice Manual, and it's actually pretty short and clear. And I recommended in the footnote that commissioners may want to take 20, 25 minutes and just read it for yourself, so you're not hearing people debate about something that sounds really abstract. But the utility cost test means that you take the costs that the utility is spending, which means the incentives, the rebates that it's giving to customers, plus the administration of the program. And usually the incentives are the vast majority of that money, and the administrative cost is not much. You take that on the cost side and you compare it to the reduction in utility fuel consumption and avoided capacity related costs, and you see which one's bigger. That's the utility cost test.
Believe it or not, I actually did look at those and review those, because I remember seeing them, someone's testimony, and I wanted to refresh my memory and recollection about those also. So very, very good suggestion. And not sure I heard this, but I want to make sure. Did I hear in the conversation, I guess, questions that I think between you and Commissioner Irvin, am I hearing that with this program, Duke is going to reduce rates for all customers?
Let me make, just to be clear, a distinction between rates and costs. It's possible to reduce utility costs. So if customers have the 20 SEER air conditioner, it could be that you look at all those customers and they've reduced their costs, and when you add up the costs of all utility customers, they're lower, even though the rates didn't go down. They're still paying the same rate, but they're using less energy. So that's talking about customer costs, not utility costs. But it's possible to lower customer costs without lowering rates. And traditionally, there was kind of an assumption that if you do that over time in a significant way, it'll end up raising utility rates, because the utility will be recovering the cost of its assets over a smaller number of kilowatt hours. But over time, people demonstrated that actually, which may sound like common sense, in the long run, the cost reductions also should lead to rate reductions. And that's what I was saying, is it's significant to me that Mr. Duff agreed with that in his testimony.
I'm sure Mr. Duff will get a chance to respond to these later. And I agree, if if a utility is successful in flattening its peak, reducing or restraining the demand, which would defer, extend out further the need for capital cost for generation or whatever else, the capacity or ability to, if not reduce rates, to hold rates steady, or if increase marginally. Those things make sense that would allow the opportunity to do that sort of thing relative to rates. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's more short-term, more immediate rate impacts in the fuel charge because the fuel charge is updated every year, right? And so in year one, if you have 1,000 solar customers, and then in year two, you add another 1,000. In year three, you add another 1,000. By year three, that's a total of 3,000. And they are using, the utility is buying less fuel, particularly natural gas. They're not really turning down the nuclear plant, right? So they're buying less and less fuel to serve those customers. And those costs are not realized in rates 10 years from now. They're realized fairly quickly.
Understand. And if I heard you correctly, and I think your questioning with, I think it was Commissioner Irvin, I don't recall, talking about their peaking, reducing the peaking, and if I'm correct, I think Duke has shifted, or they are shifted to a winter peaking. Is that correct?
I would say that's a contestable fact, but I think I said something a little bit more narrow, which was that their planning is oriented towards winter peaking. Not to split hairs, but it's the magnitude of the summer peaks and winter peaks are close. The predictability of the summer peak is more likely. Like we had a big winter peak in February 2018 when the polar vortex hit. We didn't have it last year, but we definitely had hot summer afternoons every summer. So there's the magnitude, there's the frequency, and then, to the degree that both Duke and Dominion have brought online large utility scale solar portfolios, what they're serving is not, with their remaining plants, is not the total load, but the net load. And so that's probably the most significant reason why, even though there are more summer peaks and more frequent summer peaks and frequently bigger summer peaks, the utility is planning more on the winter side.
But relative to the winter peaking, how does this program make that better?
The way that is counted in the application before you is through the BYOT program, Bring Your Own Thermostat, and specifically that Duke is gaining a contractual right to turn down that thermostat when it's needed. I think that it's likely that to the degree these smart thermostats are learning thermostats, there could be other improvements. And I think, to the point that this is an innovative program, it's the first iteration. And so for solar and for many efficiency technologies, particularly the weather sensitive ones, reaching the customer, educating the customer, getting the customer to make some kind of positive decision for themselves on information that they don't have the time to crunch the numbers 10 years into the future. Like just having contact, bringing the customer within a program is the first step to tackling those other issues.
Change customer behavior.
Yes.
I heard what you said, and that's what I thought. The BYOT, it allows Duke to simply control the thermostat. And while I get it, and I think that would definitely help with the peaking, to me, it's just maintaining or managing demand. It's not energy efficiency, because you're going to turn the thermostat up or down in the winter and require people to put more layers on, which I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm saying that is a demand control issue that is not, in my opinion, an energy efficiency issue. Am I correct? Incorrect?
I'm really glad you returned to that topic, because I think maybe the concept you're articulating is what's called end use efficiency. In the energy efficiency world, you know, there are many types of efficiency, and what energy efficiency program people call all the different ways of using energy is an end use. Like air conditioning is an end use, hot water is an end use, and so we use that term to distinguish that type of efficiency from other efficiencies, but it all goes back to statutes like the one under which this application was submitted in South Carolina, generally followed the oil embargo of the 70s. And at that time, prior to fracking, oil and gas prices tracked each other very closely and were very volatile, partly because we were reliant on imports. And so it was a major purpose of these programs, and part of the theory was that if you reduce the load at the end use, then you're saving all the upstream energy, starting with the power plant that generally at that time wasted 2/3 of the there's end use energy and there's primary energy. And the primary is the coal and the gas. It goes into the power plant and you waste 2/3 of it up the smokestack. And then you take the 1/3 that's left, and I'm using historic numbers. Modern combined cycle plants are more like 50% efficient. But once it generates electricity, then it goes through a bunch of transmission lines and loses 2%. Then it goes through the distribution system, loses a few more percent. Finally, it arrives at your house and you use it for a toaster. So if you save a kilowatt at the toaster or kilowatt hour, you're saving way more than a kilowatt hour worth of primary fuel. And so the end use efficiency is one of the types of efficiency that are, to me, all organized around the principle. You know, Mr. Duff talked about reducing usage, but I think it's more than simply reducing usage, period. It's reducing the input fuels that were creating the economic volatility and the environmental damage. That's where the public interest lies.
So in total, is that, if I ask you, what's your definition of energy efficiency, would that be it, or is it a one sentence thing? What is your definition of energy efficiency?
Your definition of getting the same service from less energy is a good working definition of end use efficiency. I think it's clear that the South Carolina statute is broader than that and includes efficiencies on the system, and that they're particularly relevant in this case because we're dealing with renewable distributed generation. And distributed generation is not necessarily renewable. Distributed generation has been pursued, whether it's at the scale of a paper mill or a CHP unit at MUSC that they're building right now, or you know, generators at various industrial facilities. We've pursued distributed generation precisely to get efficiency, and not just the efficiency of CHP, but efficiency on the utility system, primarily from reducing line losses. So I think we have to recognize that this is a type of distributed generation, and it's renewable, And the point of the renewableness is that that's avoiding those fossil fuel inputs that I was talking about before. So we're bringing together two things in the renewable distributed generation. And one of those is and always has been a focus on system efficiency.
Okay, now I believe we're really getting to the crux of the matter, what all this is. It seems. And I've reviewed the statute also. I'm hearing you say that basically energy efficiency, the way, you did not say the intent, but the way ours is set up in South Carolina is it's, you know, kind of more broad and includes energy distribution resources and such as that. And I think what I've gathered and what I've heard so far, and there's plenty of time to change, is that's where we are. That's the issue. The issue is, all right, the application was turned in under this reg, but is it this one? And in a nutshell, it seems to boil down to, is rooftop solar or solar panels considered energy efficient product or an energy efficient item or not? Is that a reasonable summation of the crux of the matter?
I think it's more than that, because I don't think that, first of all, this was submitted under a statute that broadly authorizes demand reduction, energy efficiency. It specifically authorizes renewable energy. So even if you didn't mention energy efficiency, this would be specifically authorized. So I don't think the question is really the statutory authority. I think, you know, the policy questions are, is it designed in a way that it's in the public interest, i.e., is it going to produce the cost reductions? And I think there's, you know, some real understanding that needs to come around how energy efficiency programs work and why the savings that we're talking about in this application are distinct from solar choice.
Well, I'm hoping in the balance of this hearing, then, we address that in more detail, because I'm not sure I agree with all of that, but doesn't mean that you're wrong and I'm right. You know, I think the debate about which section that would fall under relative to using rooftop solar or whatever, I think that's a reasonable point to argue or disagree with, and that's where we appear to be. And relative to, even if it is this, do these items fall under that too? But the good thing is there's more to come, so I'm going to sit here and patiently listen, but I have three more questions, if that's okay, as soon as I find them. Are you aware of any other states that have adopted policies that consider solar panels or solar PV as energy efficiency?
So, you know, the reason I'm pausing is because when I was having conversations years ago with people about this whole UTC versus TRC thing, at that time solar prices were a lot higher. And I remember asking somebody at a conference, is there any place that solar passes TRC? Because that was the primary test. And I was told, well, in Nevada, it passes UTC. So there was some program out there. I don't know what it was. So I don't want to say categorically no, but I don't think there's another program today that looks just like this. And I also know that in Arkansas, we considered the question of whether solar could be offered under the demand side management programs. And I don't think we reached it didn't come up for an adjudication. We had one utility saying no and one saying yes. But in my time there, we didn't hit it squarely on the head.
Well, anyone that knows me knows that my history, my past, I'm never afraid to try things or do things or whatever. But that said, when it came to the utility and things like that, I didn't just want to do things because they were cool or it seemed good at the time or just to be first. I kind of wanted to know that, okay, if I do this or if we do this, independent of what anyone else is doing, is this better for my customer? Is it going to help me reduce costs, keep costs the same, make the system better, whatever? So the reason I asked that, and then I asked that of Mr. Duff, is not saying that it should be or should not be, or that we should not do it because no other state's doing it, but perhaps there might be a reason why these other states are not recognizing it as that. I'm saying I think that's just as good a question to ask as not ask. Would you agree with that?
I do, and there's a very clear reason for most of history why. So the statutes that tend to authorize demand side management, including renewable distributed generation, and also the cost tests that we think of as energy efficiency cost tests always contemplated from the beginning that they could be applied to distributed generation and particularly to solar.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, this is Andrew Bateman. I apologize. I hate to interrupt. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moore has deviated a number of times into statutory interpretations. I'd request that he keep his testimony just to the facts.
Okay, I'm trying to get, sorry.
So you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific than that, because their conversation has been going back and forth for a while and covered a lot of different issues. So I just want to make sure the record is clear. Do you remember the sentence or the question that was answered where he deviated?
I don't remember all of them. I remember the most recent instance, and I don't remember the exact sentence, nor do I remember the exact question, but it was related to an interpretation of the DSM statutes and how they relate to cost tests, not only in South Carolina, but around the country as well.
Okay. Well, all right. So your objection is noted, and do me a favor, because I'm trying to listen and read at the same time. When you hear him deviate from my prior ruling regarding statutory interpretation, please object.
Absolutely. And to be clear, Mr. Chairman, I'm not objecting on the basis that Mr. Moore was offering his opinion as to the legislative intent of the EFA. Rather, I'm objecting on the basis that Mr. Moore is offering legal opinion generally. So I just want to be clear. I'm not accusing Mr. Moore of violating your order previously.
All right. Thank you.
I'll limit my comments to the utility cost tests, UCT, TRC, RIM test, what are called the California Standard Practice Manual, because that's not a statute. That's a practice that's generally used around the country in this field. And you can read early versions of that. It's been updated several times that explicitly refer to distributed generation, and they're talking about solar. So it was always intended to be included within that framework. And the commissioner's question was, what's the reason? Why didn't it actually go into practice? It was because the solar prices were so much higher than efficiency measures. It was so clear they wouldn't pass the cost test that it was, frankly laughable. And when I referred in my direct testimony to a history in which distributed generation and energy efficiency have been treated differently, it was partly a polite allusion to the fact that people in the energy efficiency field often felt like solar was kind of given a special treatment when everything that's done under the energy efficiency rubric is based on rigorous cost justification. And so what has changed, and is really only recently even possible to do, is that as solar prices come down significantly, you can start bringing that measure into a framework that was always always contemplated to allow it.
Well, let me kind of ask you about just a couple of things that really concern me, and you know, the debate whether this is energy efficiency or just generation. I guess we all have our views about that, and perhaps that will become more clear as time goes on. But there's been discussions relative to cost shift or cost subsidization. And you made a point, which I think an interesting point, good point, that the solar choice tariff was to accommodate or basically take care of the of that cost shift issue. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what concerns me is I've heard more than once that there is no cost shift, and you know, I've ran no numbers, but I'm sitting here thinking about the incentives, the dollars that we're hearing, and I'm kind of struggling to see how there cannot be a cost shift in addition to solar choice tariff. Where am I wrong, or what am I missing?
I think that the issue is that, let's say, as an alternative to the utility taking money from ratepayers and using it to buy down the cost of solar for a group of customers. Let's say the alternative is to build the peaker plant. If it's true that the peaker plant's more expensive, then all ratepayers are going to pay more for that, regardless of whether it's a cost shift. In other words, and you know, if you want to get more deep into it, it's not really the case that each individual utility investment equally benefits all ratepayers anyway. And so I think the cost shift argument is a shorthand that papers over and unfairly characterizes the equitableness and the effect of the investments.
Okay. And I guess my final concern, at least at this point, is as I've listened and as I've read the testimony from all, you know, what the program is, how it works, and through the course of this so far, understanding better what BYOT is and such, I have concern that that there seems to be downside to customers participating and non-participating. But when I kind of look at the way it's set up for the Duke companies and the solar companies, I see absolutely zero downside with no possibility of downside. So any downside that could occur falls 100% on the customer, participating and non-participating. You know, there seems to be this is a panacea, eureka, we found it, and it well may be, but I still have those bells ringing and that light flashing, and when I come down and boil it down and look at that, I don't feel comfortable with that right now, and so far no one's made me feel a whole lot warmer and fuzzier. Can you do that?
I don't know if I can make you feel warm and fuzzy about it, but I would say you know, as we go forward, the utility is going to make investments either in this or in something else. And so we have to make this, I think, collectively the smartest decision about that. And that the cost benefit analysis is a framework established exactly for that purpose, to try to have rigor when we decide which type of investment we're going to make.
But on all those future things that you just alluded to, whether it be a new plant or rate or whatever, would the company still not need to come before the commission before any of that is done?
Yes, and I guess, you know, another way to say what I was saying is that if you say no to the program, the alternative isn't that ratepayers don't pay anything. The alternative is the ratepayers pay for something else. So you have to compare those futures in reaching a decision.
Okay. I think that's it. Mr. Moore, I appreciate it. I appreciate your indulgence and your patience. Thank you very much. And I didn't mean to lead you into the quagmire there. Apologize. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Williams, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Moore. I appreciate your referencing the footnote where you gave us a access to like a 20-minute tutorial on various REM tests. Could you point me to it in your testimony?
Yes, it might take me just a second.
Is it in your initial testimony?
I believe it was in my surrebuttal.
Okay, I haven't looked there, so we can take that up later. I'll look there. That's good enough.
And I hope it's there because you know, obviously you go through iterations. 5, 6.
We're good for now. I can ask you again. In the interest of time, let's just keep going, and I'll look in it. Based on your expertise and your time in the industry, I'm curious about your definition for energy efficiency and how it may have changed over time. Is that a fair question to ask you?
Yes. And just while we're at it, it's page 12 of my surrebuttal, and it's footnote 8.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think what I was trying to clarify or you know, suggest for Mr. Caston, Commissioner Caston, was that that he's right. There is a definition of energy efficiency that pertains to end use efficiency, and that one of the purposes of that narrow definition of one type of energy efficiency is ultimately to cost effectively leverage efficiencies further up the system. And so it's not that there's one thing that's energy efficiency and that's end use efficiency and everything else is not. It's actually end use efficiency in service of system-wide efficiencies and ultimately the efficient use of fuels that are recognized to have issues both environmentally and economically. And so, you know, you can kind of do a quick hit and say this is energy efficiency, but when you think through it, there are many shades and types. And I think it's very useful and helpful to have that definition that is getting the same service for less energy. But I think you have to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. You got to keep that in your mind, but then think about how it affects everything else. And there are other ways to get efficiency that are important throughout the utility system.
Has the definition of energy efficiency evolved over time?
Yes, I would say generally, the broader term from, you know, decades ago would be conservation, and then energy efficiencies is a subset of conservation. It could also roughly equivalent to conservation would be demand side management or demand side activities, which is what South Carolina's statute says. And to me, demand side management includes energy efficiency and it includes demand response. Like the purpose of it is to be an umbrella term for those two things. But I know the practice in this state is to see DSM as distinct in really, in my mind, equivalent to demand response.
Okay. Do you have any experience with trends of rooftop solar customers and their tendency to practice energy efficiency?
I don't have deep experience in that area. You know, I follow some popular press on that. And I think I footnoted some of that in my testimony.
Okay. I'll look further in your footnotes. As I think about how a bring your own thermostat would work functionally, I understand its demand side management realm easily, but could it have an energy efficiency realm as well?
Yes.
Would you talk about that?
So, you know, the BYOT program is designed for the utility company to send a signal right when it's most needed and get a brief reduction. That generally, if you cycle your furnace or the blower off for 1 to 4 hours, the net energy savings are going to be small to nothing because your furnace is going to come back on and it's going to catch up. It's going to have to work hard to get back to where it was. And so you're going to end up with net, not really energy efficiency, demand response. However, as I mentioned, these learning thermostats are intended not to just make that one quick hit in a critical peak morning, but every day to have some impact on the amount of energy used in the home. And, you know, it's very useful to have clear idea and concept of what energy efficiency is and use efficiency, but out in the real world, they interact with each other. And, you know, a measure that is, you call an energy efficiency measure can change behavior, and a behavioral measure can change energy usage. And almost any time you change the pattern of usage, you're having some effect on efficiency or a potential effect that can be leveraged in a program. So I think it's not as clear cut in the real world as it is in theory.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Any more commissioner questions for this witness? All right. Any redirect?
Mr. Chairman, Emma Clancy here. We have no redirect for Mr. Moore, and we'd ask that he be excused.
All right. Mr. Moore, thank you for your testimony today. You may step down from the witness stand and you are excused.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick 10-minute recess. We'll be back at 4:45. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket numbers 2021-143E and 2021-144E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners C. Williams, Belzer, Powers, Caston, and J. Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Irvin and Thomas. So we are at the Office of Regulatory Staff's first panel, and I understand the Office of Regulatory Staff has an expert that is prepared to give direct and rebuttal. We do have Tuesday reserved to complete this matter, but I wanted to see whether or not there would be any impact on the presentation of your case if we stop for the day and start it back on Tuesday at 10 a.m., or would you rather try to finish Mr. Horry's testimony today, or this evening?
Mr. Chairman, this is Andrew Bateman with ORS. I appreciate you bringing this tension to light, and ORS would have no objection and does not believe there's any prejudicial impact to recessing at the current moment and resuming, I think you said 10 a.m. on Tuesday?
Correct. Okay. If that is the case, then we are in recess until 10 a.m. Tuesday morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.